Alrighty, the recording has started, and then I'm going to share my screen. All right, could everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Alrighty. Well, welcome to this Monday, April 25th Brown Bag Lunch presentation. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Dan Oppenborn. I am the OLLI Interim Program Specialist, and we're going to get started today. First, we're going to start off with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that Cal Poly Humboldt is located on the unceded lands of the Wiyot people. Arcata is known as Gudini, meaning over in the woods or among the redwoods. We honor them and all neighboring tribes by our ongoing commitment to developing trusting, reciprocal, and long-lasting partnerships. And then here at OLLI, the Offshore Lifelong Learning Institute at Cal Poly Humboldt, we believe learning should never end. OLLI creates opportunities for academic engagement, civic involvement, personal growth, and fun. By offering a myriad of classes and experiences for a vibrant community of learners aged 50 and better, OLLI delivers learning for a lifetime. And so a little bit of a description for what the OLLI program is if you're not an OLLI member. It's a membership program, and the membership runs from July 1st through June 30th, and membership is $35 a year annually. You don't have to be 50 years or better, you just have to be 18 years older, but our programming is designed for 50 and better learners. Non-members pay an additional charge for class enrollment, and they are enrolled as space allows. But there are some big perks to becoming an OLLI member. OLLI members pay lower class fees, and they get first priority registration. When you join OLLI, you get a Cal Poly Humboldt email account, and that email account gives you a ton of digital resources, including access to a full professional version of Zoom, as well as a ton of different software and digital resources offered by the university. OLLI members also get a discount on the Check Pass for the Transportation Made Easy class. They get eligibility for some course scholarships, student discounts. You can get those at local businesses. You get to participate in OLLI special interest groups. And you get a free library card, like a student ID library card, with your OLLI membership, which gives you library resource access. And then last but not least, you get access to the gym and rec center with a small fee. OLLI members can also participate in our Friday programs called Let's Connect. This is a free Zoom chat that happens every Friday from 10 to 11. These sessions, which began in the pandemic as a response to the isolation brought by COVID-19, has grown to become a regular gathering of people and OLLI members. And every single week they have a different talking discussion questions. It ranges from what did you want to do when you grow up to what's your favorite kind of vacation food. They really talk about everything. But that's every Friday. It's a lot of fun. And yeah, that's one of the things that you have access to as an OLLI member. And like I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, you can gain access and look at all of our past brown bag recordings on our YouTube channel, which is www.youtube.com/@OLLIHumboldt. And if you have any questions about OLLI, OLLI faculty, OLLI classes, programming, anything like that, you can give us a call at 707-826-5880, or you can email at us at olli@humboldt.edu. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Jane, who is going to introduce this week's presenter. Jane, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Dane, and welcome everybody. It's delightful to see you, and it's a wonderful sunny day, and we have one to go. And by the way, the other advantage you have as a member is you do get invitations and reminders to come to the brown bag lunches. So in case you forget, we remind you. And then the link, by the way, is the same link all semester. So once you have the link, you can always use it again if you, for some reason, don't get an invitation. I'm happy to invite Darren. How do you pronounce that? Sorry, Darren.
That's okay. You pronounce it Maru.
Maru. Okay, that was going to be my guess, but I might have been wrong. Who has a master's degree in fisheries biology from Humboldt State University and joined Cal Trout in 2011. Before joining the organization, he worked on numerous North Coast projects as a local watershed restoration scientist with McBain and Tresh, Inc. He is currently directing, among other projects, the Eel River Recovery Keystone Initiative, the organization's largest endeavor to date, and he'll be describing how big that is, which is huge. He lives in Arcata with his wife and 2 sons. It's all yours, Darren.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Jane. Appreciate it. I'm going to start off by sharing my presentation here. Hopefully everybody can see that okay. Good. Well, I guess it's afternoon now, so good afternoon, everybody. My name is Darren. I'm the North Coast Director for California Trout. Thanks for being here, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk to you about some of my program. I'm going to start off with a disclaimer before I get into my presentation. My disclaimer is that I had to drive from Arcata this morning over to Mount Shasta, and you all know that road, and I left at about 7 a.m. and had plenty of coffee along the way, so I'm a little bit frantic. So if I start talking really loud and fast, and it's because I'm coffeeed up and that drive was harrowing. But I'll try to maintain my calmness and speak to you for about 45 minutes about my program. Yeah, and another correction is that I don't have a fisheries biology degree. I was actually in the biology department at Humboldt State University, and I graduated in about 1996. And I saw Dr. Howard Stouffer on the call this morning, was one of my professors back then. So hello, Howard. Good to see you this morning, and glad to know we're all still learning together. Great to see you. Anyway, yeah, I was a consultant for a number of years in Arcata, and then in 2011 joined California Trout. I'm the North Coast Director, and have several different ongoing activities and programs throughout the North Coast. Some of those things I'm going to talk to you about, but I'm primarily going to focus on our Eel River watershed program, and really get into the nuts and bolts of that. So let me figure out how to advance my slides. Here we go. So I'll talk a little bit about our organization just so you have a background of who Cal Trout is, and who my program colleagues are. So our mission is ensuring healthy waters and resilient wild fish for a better California. And this mission started over 50 years ago with some passionate trout anglers who decided to take it upon themselves to protect some of their favorite waters where they fish throughout the state. So we had sort of an initial recreational fishing orientation. That's evolved over the years, and now our mission is really broadly focused on conservation, restoration, and certainly a focus on bringing back some of our state's iconic salmon, trout, and steelhead populations. So got quite a big mission and vision here and lots of work to do. Our organization is central in California with a central office in San Francisco, and then we operate by having regional offices throughout the state. So for example, I'm the director for the North Coast region. I live in Arcata. I'm over in our colleagues' office today in Mount Shasta. We have offices in the Central Valley, Eastern Sierras, Bay Area, and Southern California. And so we are sort of embedded in those communities where we're doing our work, have lots of partnerships within those communities, including, with state, federal agency representatives, and a lot of other watershed groups and so forth that are trying to do the work that is part of our mission. We focus on 5 different initiatives that are shown here in the little graphic that's on the left of the screen. Protecting the Best is sort of a conservation initiative where those watersheds and rivers are healthy. We want to protect them and not let them get degraded. Reconnecting Habitat has to do with fish passage, removal of barriers like dams and culverts, fixing places where fish can get back into the watersheds. Restoring estuaries, certainly estuaries are vitally important to salmon and steelhead and many other species as well. So we have a focus there. Stewarding source areas. We know that the waters come down in the mountains and drain down into the rivers. And so protecting those headwater source areas and good water quality and conditions up there will ensure their resilience and vitality for many generations to come. And then the last initiative is integrating wild fish and working landscapes. So we know there's a lot of development in our watersheds, and we want to work with private landowners, agricultural interests, forest and timber industry representatives, and try to make things better within those working landscapes as well. So it's not just about protection and conservation, but also working within places that have had resource development going on where we can also do some good natural resource protections. And so that's sort of the breadth of our work throughout the state and within my region. Um, I'm very blessed to work with about 8 or 9 other colleagues, most of us scientists who've gotten educations in environmental sciences or geology or engineering, number of different trades that are part of our group here. We focus on obtaining grant funding to do the work that we do. So a lot of our work is contract and grant management. Um, we have a team in San Francisco that helps us with communications, social media sorts of things, making videos of our work, and then raising funds that support our programs as well. And then within each of the regions, each of the programs throughout California, we're heavily dependent on the expertise in consulting firms, other nonprofits, state and federal agency representatives. So I kind of view us as the catalyst, bringing together a lot of different professions and expertises and focusing on specific projects, trying to get them proposed, implemented, and then move on to the next. And so CalTrout as a nonprofit sort of is a central facilitator for a lot of that work that we do, but we really heavily depend on a lot of other scientific and planning expertise along the way. I'm going to give you 3 slides showing 3 different projects that aren't the Eel River, just to give you a flavor for other things that are going on in my program throughout our North Coast region. I'm going to start with Redwood Creek, which is the river that comes out of Redwood National and State Parks to the north of Arcata. And so you see 2 different photographs. The black and white is from 1948, and the one on the left in color is from 2023, I believe. And so you see there's an Army Corps levee project, if you're not familiar with the community of Oric and Redwood Creek coming out of the valley. The Army Corps built a levee project in 1968. This followed the 1964 flood that was sort of catastrophic for a lot of North Coast regions, including Redwood Creek and Redwood Valley. And that Army Corps project has been managed by the Corps and Humboldt County since then and has developed problems along the way. And so to resolve some of those problems, CalTrout has been working with the 2 primary landowners at the lower end in the estuary to bring together a collaborative group that includes National Park Service, NOAA Fisheries, CDFW, the landowners themselves, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and other partners, Humboldt County in particular. And we're going to focus on conducting a feasibility study that will propose to modify portions of that levee project to bring back some ecological function in the estuary itself. So it's primarily restoration focused in the estuary. So if you've ever been out to the Redwood National Park Visitors Center, that's just to the right of that ponded wetland there in the image, you'll know that zone that I'm talking about. That's going to be going on for the next couple of years, so you may hear things about it in the news, but it's going to be a pretty big project. Very excited about it. The next one is sort of right in our backyard. This is the Elk River looking to the west, and if you see in the distance the entrance to Humboldt Bay, the harbor entrance there, and then across the middle of the photograph is Highway 101. And so this is just to the south end of Eureka, where Elk River flows into Humboldt Bay. And you see a lot of water on the landscape in this particular area. And that's part of the problem we're trying to solve here. This area is being threatened by sea level rise in addition to land subsidence that's happening around Humboldt Bay. And so the relative sea level rise is happening much more quickly than anywhere else in California. These lands were former tide lands that were reclaimed to agricultural lands, and now they're sort of in a process of reverting back to that salt marsh condition that was historically there. And so CalTrout's working with landowners down in this area to try to bring some protections to some of the agricultural lands that are still functional while implementing what we call a sea level rise retreat strategy, where we're trying to pull back some of that agricultural lands and allow that natural habitat to restore itself. So very big program going on in Elk River, and you'll be seeing that play out over the next few years as well. And then one step further to the south, this is at the mouth of Eel River. So if this camera that took this photograph turned to the right, to the left 90 degrees, you would see the mouth of the Eel River emptying into the Pacific Ocean. So this is looking north across the northern half of the Eel River Delta, and you can see Humboldt Bay in the distance. And in the very center of the photograph, where you see the water ponded up and a lot of brown area, that area is also being subjected to sea level rise. It was used for many decades as agricultural land. A lot of the levees that were built to protect that against the salt water have leaked and not been maintained, and so a lot of this landscape is reverting back to salt marsh as well. So CalTrout's leading a project with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and two private landowners out there and the State Coastal Conservancy, and we'll be implementing a large-scale habitat restoration project, hopefully as soon as next summer, 2026, maybe 2027, depending on the funding situation with the federal government, but we're hopeful to get that on the ground sometime soon. And that's just a kind of an idea of some of the projects that my program in Arcata is focused on. And now we'll talk a little bit more about the main subject for today, which is the Eel River. So when I joined CalTrout in 2011, my program had a pretty keen focus on the Eel River. It's one of the largest watersheds in the state of California. It's the third largest watershed entirely in California. It has a lot of water, a lot of land, spans 5 different counties. And I have a question mark in there. Do y'all know Humboldt, Mendocino, Trinity Lake, and what other county the Eel River spans? Take your guess. It's Glenn County as well. So it gets all the way into Glenn County, which is sort of headwaters at the southern end as it encroaches into the Mendocino National Forest. The Eel River has several populations of salmon and steelhead that are listed under the Federal Endangered Species Act as threatened. That's the coho salmon, the coastal Chinook salmon, and we have 2 runs of steelhead, a North Coast winter run and a North Coast summer steelhead run. So a lot of our efforts in the Eel River are focused on bringing resources to bring back those populations. The commercial Chinook population, for example, is very vital to Eureka and our harbor and commercial fishing, and we'd like to see a rebound in that population. So that's sort of an important part of our effort here, but it's also bringing back ecological function and resiliency to this watershed that's very important to the northern part of California. And I have a question here. How did the Eel River get its name? If you haven't read the story, you can click on this, and I'll probably be able to circulate this slideshow so you can get this link, but you can get this document through the Humboldt Commons, the digital commons, and read about it. It's the journal from the 1849-1850 journey of 8 men who came to the North Coast for the first time. And if you haven't read that, it's really, really fascinating. And they're the ones who, along their journey, named the Eel River, including many other features on the North Coast. So if you haven't read that, really neat, really interesting historical reading about the Eel River North Coast. Find my clicker here. Yeah, so let's get into some of the details about the Eel River. Given I'm a fisheries organization with an orientation toward our salmon and steelhead populations, I often get asked this question, well, how many fish were there in the Eel River, or how many are there now? And those are hard questions to answer from a scientific perspective to give accuracy, but we have a general understanding of how many fish there were. In 2010, CalTrout commissioned a study by UC Davis scientists Ron Yoshiyama and Dr. Peter Moyle. They looked into the records that were kept throughout the years from Department of Fish and Wildlife and Fish Commission and so forth. There weren't very good information about the actual numbers of salmon and steelhead that used to come into the eel. So what they did was they took the cannery records from the early cannery days in the Ferndale Bottoms area and used that information to sort of back calculate how many fish there used to be. So they knew how many fish it took to fill one barrel or one can of salmon that was exported, and they did count those cannery counts. So we had a fairly good idea of that. So they kind of back calculated how many fish it resulted in. And their estimates were about 93,000, roughly 100,000 salmon caught per year on average. And then there were these amazing years when they just had enormous runs of salmon and steelhead into the Eel River, upwards of, 500,000 in 1877 were caught. So just it was really, really a big producer of salmon and steelhead. You hear stories back then about what it was like, a few photographs that are remaining here and there, but that's all the information we have pretty much. It's all pretty speculative. But in the mid 1900s, 1960s, CDFW got involved. There was a big decline after World War II, and a lot of the logging practices that were implemented started to do damage to the watersheds. And so there was a fairly big focus on salmon and steelhead populations. And so from some of that work, we had estimates from CDFW looking at roughly, 55, 60,000 fish per year. Steelhead fishing had caught on by then. And so they had estimates of steelhead populations, upwards of 80,000 fish per year. Yeah, and so even into the 1900s, early mid 20th century, we had quite an abundant salmon and steelhead runs into the Eel River. Then there's a big lag where there wasn't very much information and not much focus on it until my program started in 2018, implementing fish counts with sonar cameras. So a sonar camera is a camera that's installed in the water, and it shoots a beam of sonars across, and we get sort of a grainy picture of fish swimming by. And it even functions in turbid water, so we get images of big fish that we assume are steelhead or salmon, depending on the season that we capture those images in. And that way we can count how many fish are coming in. So we started with a sonar camera on the South Fork eel at the Humboldt Redwood State Park. And at the same time, CDFW implemented a sonar camera on the main stem eel right about where Founders Grove is. So we started getting counts in 2018, and we've maintained those sonar operations and expanded them ever since. So I think I have an animation here. Yeah, so this is just a summary of the data that have been collected since 2018 that's giving us a better understanding of where our populations are now. So if you see, this is just for Chinook salmon since 2018. So the South Fork, Main Stem, and Van Duzen are the three primary places we're counting. And those basin-wide counts at the bottom of the table are our total counts for the Eel River for each year. So you see we're steadily climbing out of the drought years we had in 2013, 14, and 15. So there's a little bit of a Chinook salmon rebound happening. It's still low enough that this year there will be no commercial salmon harvest for the third year in a row. The federal regulators have stopped commercial salmon harvest for the last 2 years and this year as well to let those fish recover. But we're climbing back out of that real bad hole of very low abundance after the last drought that we had. So this year, our counts are going to be close to or maybe exceeding 20,000 fish throughout the entire eel basin. So it's good news in a sense that we have an upward trajectory, but we're still very low relative to those historical population numbers that I just talked about. Yeah, so just a summary here, we've lost one of the most productive salmon rivers in California as a result of all of these different cumulative impacts over the years. We've had canneries, dams installed in the headwaters, lots of logging, agriculture. The estuary is heavily modified, and we had some very large floods. We had the introduction of a non-native fish, the Sacramento pike minnow, that's native to California, but not the Eel River, and it's spread throughout the Eel River now and is causing problems for the salmon and steelhead populations. And then we have ongoing water uses by, irrigators, cannabis farmers, and so forth. And now we're experiencing climate change. And so a lot of these things have cumulatively helped degrade the watershed and the fish populations. Some of them are improving. You know, we've gone through reforms to logging practices, and I think a lot of that's paying off now. Um, but if you want to know more information about some of that past history, there was a movie made in 2017. You may have seen it. It's been on PBS over the years. Very good film, and it's just super detailed in documenting all those impacts that have happened. So you can get lots more information about that just by watching this film. Very, very well made film. So let's focus in a little bit on the Potter Valley project because it's in the news these days. The map on the left shows you the whole Eel River watershed, and then the portion that's outlined in orange is the upper headwaters to the Eel River. That's the portion of the watershed that's above Scott Dam. So Scott Dam and Cape Horn Dam are the two dams that were constructed in 1908 and 1922. They were then purchased later by Pacific Gas and Electric, who have operated them ever since as a hydro power facility. Um, and their license that had a 50-year duration came up for relicensing in 2022 and now has expired. So this Federal Energy Regulatory Commission license that PG&E had to operate their hydropower facilities has expired, and they're now proposing to decommission this project. This is just to kind of give you an idea of the location of the hydro facilities in the upper headwaters. Um, and here's a couple images. So on the left is Cape Horn Dam. It's the lowermost of the two dams, and it's the dam that diverts water into a tunnel that then passes through the mountain into the Potter Valley, which is part of the Russian River watershed. So this is called a trans-basin diversion. The water coming down the Eel River is ponded up at Cape Horn Dam, and it goes through a power, or it goes through a pump facility into a tunnel and comes out in Potter Valley. And so the electric generation facility is actually in Potter Valley itself. And that facility actually went offline in, when was it, 2020. The turbine went down, and PG&E is not going to restore it. So there is currently no hydropower generation going on in this facility at all. Scott Dam in the photograph on the right is the larger of the two that has the storage capacity. So it stores water that runs off in the spring and summer, releases it downriver into the Eel River, 12 miles down to Cape Horn Dam, and then it's diverted into the tunnel. So that's sort of the facilities that PG&E owns. And here's a little bit of statistics about those projects. So Cape Horn Dam, 63 feet high. Scott Dam is a little bit bigger, 130 feet high. There's not much storage capacity at the Cape Horn Dam facility. It's mainly just a diversion facility. Has a fish ladder, so fish can get up above Cape Horn Dam, but there's no fish passage facility at Scott Dam. So it's the upper extent of where salmon and steelhead can get. So as I mentioned, when I joined CalTrout in 2011, my organization started to focus on the Eel River. I formed this group called the Eel River Forum, and we went about sort of identifying some of the problems in the Eel River and proposing solutions for them. So the document, I wrote a report, that's the Eel River Action Plan, kind of went through, you know, item by item, the things that we could be doing as a community and as organizations to help bring back some of the health to the Eel River and some of the fish populations that we talked about. So that's still ongoing, but that entity has sort of grown and evolved over the years. One of the primary studies that we did was assessing the amount of habitat for salmon and steelhead that's above Scott Dam. So even though salmon and steelhead can't get there, we wanted to know if they were able to get there, if there would be good habitat. So one of the ways to justify, you know, advocating for dam removal, we want to get fish back up there. We want to make sure there's habitat for them to be up there. And so there were several generations of studies, one conducted by a graduate student in the Natural Research Department at Cal Poly Humboldt, another by the National Marine Fisheries Service, Southwest Fisheries Science Center, And those studies collectively concluded that there is an enormous amount of habitat. It was vitally important historically to the salmon and steelhead populations, and we really need to bring back access to that habitat above the dams if we want to have fish populations recovering. And so that information was actually carried to PG&E, and I think when they started their relicensing process in 2017, they quickly understood that going forward into relicensing their facilities would require some kind of fish passage program, which would be quite expensive for them. So I think it was one of the factors they considered when they decided not to relicense their project, and instead they tried to sell it, tried to auction it off, and now they let it license expired and they're going toward decommissioning. So some of the work that we did that kind of indicated how important it was for salmon and steelhead recovery helped PG&E come to the conclusion that their facility is no longer, economically viable for them and for the ratepayers that use PG&E power. So PG&E has been on this path and timeline since about 2017, which is about they usually start about 5 years before the license expires if they want to relicense. So in 2017, PG&E started this relicensing process. By 2019, I think they realized their hearts weren't in it, their economics weren't in it. They weren't going to go down this path. Like I said, they tried to auction the project off to the public, to any entity that was willing to take it. Nobody was. And so they just halted that relicensing process. And around 2017, our Congressman Jared Huffman stepped forward to try to bring the community together and identify solutions to this project. We called ourselves the Huffman Ad Hoc Committee, and we focused on some principles of shared interests between the Russian River interests and the Eel River interests. The Russian River interests were focused on water supply reliability. In other words, they needed to maintain some water diversion from the eel to keep their economic and river management into actions viable. Our focus is on restoration of the Eel River. And we concluded that if we work together, we'll probably have more success at achieving our individual interests than if we have a big fight over this project that extends over decades and is no fun for anybody. So we focused on what we've been calling the two basin solution. And we did quite a number of detailed studies looking at fish passage opportunities, water supply alternatives, and so forth. And have been working together ever since. And it's been a very good process. It's challenging at times because we do have some competing interests, but for the most part, we work well together. And I think we're forging ahead toward that shared solution that has a really good chance of getting implemented in a positive way for both entities. PG&E, in the meantime, has been developing their license surrender application. A draft of that was released in January of this year. A final draft license surrender application is due to FERC in July. So we're right in the middle of PG&E's timeline for putting forward a plan to decommission the project. Right now, that's happening. And if some of you follow, local Humboldt County politics, you'll know that about, let's see, when was that? Maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago, the county supervisors had a presentation from staff on a memorandum of understanding. So the groups that I just talked about that have been working together, we have an MOU. It's heading toward what we call a water diversion agreement. And we're just right in the thick of it right now, developing the terms of that agreement so we can all continue to work together in a fairly codified legal way. And it's having to do with water rights, water payments, how much water, when it'll be diverted, that sort of thing. So we're developing that plan right now alongside PG&E developing their plan for surrendering the application or surrendering the project. Yeah, and so PG&E's plan, as they've put out in draft form, includes the removal of both Scott Dam and Cape Horn Dam. They've acknowledged they'll be responsible to restore all of the footprint of Lake Pillsbury that's underwater right now. A lot of those facilities that are there, campgrounds and so forth, likely will be transitioned into U.S. Forest Service lands or other entities owning them. In other words, PG&E wants to divest itself of pretty much everything in the Eel River. And so they'll leave a lot of that behind when they leave. And so we want to help them sort of do that in a way that's beneficial to the Eel River and to our interests. And so we'll be working closely with them as their license surrender application comes forward and really commenting on it and trying to modify those terms and making it be a right plan for our community and for our watershed. We have gone through a couple iterations of feasibility studies to look at how the dams would be taken out and how the water diversion would continue. So those are the two kind of primary construction related activities that PG&E will have to solve in order to decommission this. We have this great template that just happened on the Klamath River to help guide some of that planning. And so we've been, closely focused on what has worked on the Klamath River as far as that dam removal that we can apply lessons learned to the eel. So we're in the midst of kind of coaching PG&E along on how we think they would best do this. And some of those details will be coming out over the next, months and years. But for the most part, we think a rapid dam removal that will allow a single sediment release from the reservoir and then reconstruction of a diversion facility. I'll show you some images of that in a minute. Reconstruction of a diversion facility that will be pumping water in the wintertime out of the Eel River into the Russian River watershed. That's sort of the two primary features of this construction or deconstruction plan that would be implemented to achieve this decommissioning. So this is what we call a rendering, sort of a cartoon version of the current conditions at Cape Horn Dam right now. So you see the dam and the fish ladder, and then up to the left top corner is the pump facility that takes the water out of the reservoir into the tunnel. Okay, so that's the current configuration, and the company that developed this rendering did it so they could propose what the new facility would look like. So we've got plans. Well, Sonoma Water is developing plans for this diversion facility. And so this is what is being proposed as a replacement to Cape Horn Dam. You'll notice there's no obstructions in the river. So there would be complete fish passage through this diversion facility. And if you see the green building roughly in the middle of the photograph, that building would house large pumps. And so the pumps would be pumping passively from the Eel River, but most of the flow would be passing by and staying in the Eel River. And the pumps would be operating only in the wintertime when there's abundant water to be diverted. We're working on how to cap that diversion in a way that will maintain ecological flows for the Eel River while allowing some of that surplus water that the Eel River has to be taken over into the Russian River. So our perspective is Eel River restoration and health first, and surplus water second. And the way we would do that would be by setting some baselines below which water would not ever be diverted. So in the graph that you see here, sorry, the dotted line would be that baseline flow that would have to be maintained in the Eel River. And only when the water in the river is above that can that be diverted. And when it's above that, only a portion of it, like 10% or 15% seasonally, would be diverted. So it would maintain the ecological flows that we need to have in the Eel River to maintain its fisheries and so forth. So we're working through the technical details of water management at this new proposed diversion facility to ensure that we'll have ecologically robust flows to maintain Eel River conditions. So that's sort of the broad overview of the Potter Valley project portion of what we're doing in the Eel River. We, including my program and many of the entities that we work together with, also feel like this decommissioning and license surrender process that's going on is a good nexus or catalyst for bringing broader attention to the Eel River watershed. So in addition to resolving some of the PG&E problems in the upper headwaters, we also want to bring focus to many of the other problems that are occurring throughout the Eel River that are impairing that salmon and steelhead recovery that we want to see. And so we've initiated this, what we call a basin-wide Eel River restoration and conservation planning process. We've gotten funding from state and federal agencies. We have technical committees working, and CalTrout's managing most of this, but we've got a lot of input from different partners trying to take forward a vision for broader Eel River-wide basin planning. So we've completed phase one of that plan as of June 2024. So last year we completed phase one. There's a report out. You can obtain that report online. We have a summary document, and we've been circulating those around. We had an Eel River event last Saturday, the Eel River Expo at the Fortuna River Lodge. And so we're starting to kind of roll some of that out to the public and invite public participation in the thinking and the planning for this basin-wide process. And we'll continue to do so. So stay tuned, get involved, get informed, and participate with us. Give us your ideas and participate with us in this process. And yeah, that's it. That's where I'm at today. I like to finish with this photograph. It's the what was called Gravelly Valley. So this valley is now under water in Lake Pillsbury. So you can kind of start to think of a vision for a restored post Lake Pillsbury, post Potter Valley project area in the upper headwaters. This Gravelly Valley was very vital to salmon and steelhead populations historically, and we want to bring that kind of condition back. So that's what I have for today. So thank you for being here, for listening, and for all your interest.
But we do have a number of questions. We have a number of questions.
Okay. Who would like to go first? Jane, is somebody facilitating those questions, or?
I certainly will do. I will do so.
Okay.
From John.
And Jane, you have an echo on your audio.
Oh, sorry. Oh, I don't know what to do about that. I will.
I can facilitate those if
Okay.
Jane can't
Is
fix.
that better? Jeez Louise, I have both computers on. Sorry. I don't know why that's happening. I shut down the other computer. Okay. Are you also getting counts of the pike minnow? And tell us a little bit more about the pike minnow. What is going on with that?
Yeah, great question. We are getting counts. CalTrout and the Wiyot tribe and UC Berkeley researchers initiated a program 3 years ago in the South Fork eel, looking at the pike minnow population. There were some other studies that extended back in time before that, but we really launched things around 2020. We've been doing snorkel surveys to count pike minnow in the South Fork eel. We installed a weir. I don't know if you know what a weir is. It's called a resistance board weir. It's basically a big fence that's put in the Eel River. We put it in at Piercy that prevents pike minnow from migrating upriver in the springtime when the salmon are migrating downriver. We know that as those two populations and their migratory pathways, when they collide, the salmon are getting eaten. And so we wanted to slow down that migratory run of pike minnow to let the salmon, juvenile salmon in the river, have better rearing habitat. And then we're also implementing a suppression program. So we're actually going out and manually removing some of the pike minnow from the watershed, or from the river, so we can reduce their predation on juvenile salmon and steelhead. So we are getting counts. They're very numerous. We're in the third year this year of that pike minnow weir implementation, and we'll continue to do that suppression activity into the foreseeable future. So yeah, good question.
Okay, what are the points of contention for the two parties? Amount of water diverted versus amount left in the river for diversion, and are you anywhere near close?
Yeah, really good questions. Well, some of the points of contention are who would own the water right once PG&E abandons it? I think the Russian River interests wish and hope they could own it, but we're demanding that an Eel River entity and interest has control over that water right. And as proposed now, it would go to the Round Valley Indian tribes. And then they would lease that water to the Russian River interests for that annual diversion process. So I think we've solved that. It was initially a little contentious, but I think we've got an agreement that the Round Valley Indian tribes would be the appropriate owner of that water right. Second point of contention is they need to pay for the water. For decades and centuries, for a century they've gotten that water for free, and that can't happen anymore. So the Eel River interests need to be compensated for that water transfer so that we can implement some of the restoration vision that we have. And so I think that's also solved. Um, we have a we have a principle within that agreement that says for every dollar that goes into the Russian River for the water diversion facility and so forth, equal dollar comes to the Eel River. So any state or federal public monies that are going to be spent to benefit the Russian River interests has to equally be spent to protect the Eel River interests as well. And I think that's a really fundamentally important part of our agreement so that we can have assurance that those more powerful interests don't dominate the funding that's coming into this program.
I judge those are agricultural interests.
Yes, they are. And some of them are, wealthy wine grape growers in the Alexander Valley below Lake Mendocino, who have gotten that water for free and would prefer to keep it that way, sure. But I think we'll have our way there. Yeah, and then the last one, as mentioned here in the question, certainly how much water gets diverted is contentious. Um, the Round Valley Indian tribes hired a consulting company that specializes in that sort of thing, and we have a really good model. And I think what we've proposed is robust for the Eel River and also acceptable to the Russian River interests. So I think we've gotten over that issue as well. And then the last one is the duration of the agreement. So, they want water supply reliability for many decades to come. We would like to have renewal of that commitment to that diversion more frequently. And so I think we've bridged that where we have sort of tentatively agreed to a 30-year term with a potential for renewal after 30 years. And then it goes for another 20 years and then it would cease. And so we want the Russian River interests to, in the meantime, develop water independence from the Eel River. So they'll have a fair amount of time to do that. And I think we've bridged that contentious issue as well. But
And then what worked on the Klamath River that would transfer to Potter Valley? Who pays?
Well, yeah, interesting question. I think one of the key things was actually demonstrating that fish passage at that facility was necessary for salmon and steelhead population recovery. And that I think was sort of integral to PG&E's making this decision. And it was similar to the calculus for Pacific Core when the Klamath Dam, relicensing was going on. So that was a lesson learned that we've sort of already passed by. The other one was what's going to happen when we take out these dams? Is it going to really destroy the river downriver and the fish that are in it? And it's a big question, but we've seen it for the Klamath now. We saw a huge sediment release into the river, but we saw fish respond to it almost immediately. My colleague up here in the Mount Shasta office operated that sonar camera at the place where Iron Gate Dam was removed, and within the first week of the salmon migration run, they were going past that camera. In other words, past Iron Gate Dam into the waters above. And so the fish responded immediately, and the river's been recovering pretty rapidly. So I think we've learned that the river can handle that kind of impact and recover quickly, and that's what we're hoping for the Eel River as well.
Richard said that he read in the Sunday Press Democrat that the Trump administration is cutting off funding to restore the Klamath. Is that true? And I followed up with, is the state funding sufficient if Trump halts the federal?
Yeah, really good question. So the first one I'm not aware of. You're ahead of me in the news. I did not see that Press Democrat. But I think there will be enough state resources to keep that going. voters in California just passed Proposition 4. That's going through the legislative and budget process right now. Those funds will be available for, river restoration throughout the state, including the Klamath River. I think we'll be okay. I think more of a concern is um, the dismantling of the federal agencies that are, responsible for managing the rivers and salmon and steelhead recovery, National Marine Fisheries Service, Bureau of Reclamation, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Those agencies are in Forest Service. They're being threatened. Staff are leaving right now, just in droves. So that's kind of concerning to us. As far as who will pay, yeah, in the Klamath, it was a little different. There was a lot more public funding to support Klamath Dam removal than we think we'll need in the PG&E Potter Valley project. PG&E will pay for dam removal. They have in their ratepayer program with the CPUC, they have a fund for dam decommissioning, and that will apply in this case. We have some estimates of the cost of that. It's probably upwards of $200 million. And we're fairly certain that PG&E will be committed to all of that for dam removal and the restoration that's going to be part of that as well.
And Richard indicates PG&E will pay for the Eel River dam removal, and that's part of the FERC requirement. But Trump could throw cold water on Eel River dams removal. Lake County and the Farms Bureau in Lake Mendocino, Sonoma, and Marin County have asked feds to take over dams.
Yeah, there's a very vocal minority group that lives around Lake Pillsbury. I don't think they represent the broader community. They're not very factually informed because I think the status quo, as it is operated now, will deliver less water than the post decommissioning program that we're proposing. And so, PG&E isn't going to operate hydropower anymore. There's no hydropower coming from that project. They also have expressed some concerns about the seismic condition of the dams so that they're not using what they call the radial gates that raise up and store more water. And then they've stopped letting the lake get down below a certain threshold because the valve itself that releases water is threatened with getting filled with sediment. So there's a lot of conditions around this Scott Dam facility that are like it's about to break down in big. So nobody's going to take it over and operate it. It's got to get taken down. And if it just stays as the status quo, like I said, it'll deliver less water with more uncertainty than what's being proposed post decommissioning. And so I think that community is banking on some miracle from the federal government that we don't think is going to happen. And it really isn't warranted. We have a really good compromise proposal and plan. It benefits everybody. And I think keeping those dams in place is only benefiting a few people, and it's just not the way to go.
Does anybody else have any questions? Say now or forever hold your peace until the next time. Then Darren, thank you ever so much for giving this presentation. It sheds a whole lot of light on questions that have been unanswered, and really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you all for being here.
And I want to let you all know that we have our last brown bag lunch next Monday. The title is When Death Comes Knocking, Palliative and Hospice Care with Dr. Ellen Mahoney, who's famous in this area for her work on cancer, but she was also a co-founder of, I believe, hospice and the palliative care unit in St. Joe's. We'll discuss how to recognize when death is approaching and the options for addressing that inevitability, or the art of dying peacefully, which becomes relevant at our age. These options include palliative care, hospice care, use of a death doula or soul midwife, and the use of California's euthanasia law. So if you're have some interest in these issues, and many of us are getting there, do come. And you can ask lots of questions about it as well. So we wish you a very great week, and look forward to seeing you next Monday. And that will be the end of our session for the spring session. And we'll all be talking to you about what's afterwards. We'll be talking to you about what's happening in the summer. Have a great time. It's beautiful out. And thank you so much, Darren. We very much appreciate it.
Thank you again as well. Appreciate it. And y'all have a good afternoon.